Good evening and welcome to Critical Concern live stream discussion about the very topical subject of conversion therapy. And I'm delighted that we've got a special guest today, Dr. Mike Davidson of the Core Issues Trust. Mike, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time and appreciate your expertise and your ministry in this whole area as well. There's no better person to be discussing this with, in my view. Mike, can I start by asking you a bit about your background and how you've got into this whole area?
Well, essentially, because of my own issues, Tim, I think I was a very sensitive child, and that caused issues, I would say, at school. And I think there were differences between myself and peers, and that led to a feeling of feeling very different from those around me. I certainly had friends, but there was something that was beginning to emerge in my life that really...
Are you talking about as a teenager now, or what are you talking about? What age are you talking about?
Well, even pre-pubescent, so in primary school.
Right.
I don't think I had a good sense of how to operate with my peers.
Right.
And for that reason, I felt very marginalized. And with me, it really was a case that I would be the last man chosen when it came to...
the football as a playground sort of thing, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
So it was a serious issue for me, to the point where I really didn't know what the basic rules of the game were. So that caused a problem, I think, with my peers, and left me fairly isolated. And that grew until I think there was a difference between who I was operating as and what I felt I should be doing in life. I could see other boys doing things in a much more confident way, and that really impacted on me.
Right. And so this isn't really meant to be a counselling session, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into that, but I suppose I would be interested in what you attribute that to a bit, and then how that then developed into sexuality and so on.
Well, who knows? And maybe there is some genetics involved in all of that. There may well be environmental things. But the point is there's a kind of envy that begins to develop in a young boy's life, and a sense of difference and a sense of isolation and a yearning, a longing to be part of the team, to be accepted.
Yeah.
When that doesn't happen, then I think something takes place that, creates envy, and that becomes sexualized later on during puberty.
Right. And so for you then, how did that then develop post-puberty and so on in terms of your relationships going forward from there?
Well, I guess the thing was, when I came to Christ and I had a very clear conversion experience, I went to a camp, and again, I felt very isolated from many in the camp, but I connected with one of the leaders, and that leader, well, he hugged me. And this was actually the first time this had ever happened to me. And I didn't understand it. I think there was an issue with how I perceived men, and this was something that touched me, not in some kind of sexual way, but made me recognize that men were not according to the stereotype, perhaps, that I was building in my life. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, eventually, as I got to the end of high school, I knew that I had a call to serve the Lord and to become a pastor. That's how I interpreted it. And so I began to do that, and went to Bible college and was there for 2 or 3 years. And then, unfortunately, what happened was somebody came into the Bible college, a leader who definitely had been influenced by homosexuality, And not much happened, let me put it that way, but enough happened to really confuse me, especially because this was a leader
In
coming
terms
in.
of the relationship, how the relationship develops, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was something inappropriate in terms of the quality of the emotional interaction between us.
Right.
And I found that very confusing. And there was a little bit more that took place, but enough to unnerve me and to really begin to get me to question my faith and the fact that I felt called to serve the Lord. How could I do that when I had this issue? And I suppose that is a characteristic of my story. There was this inner conflict and this turmoil that I felt, nobody was telling me this, I felt was inconsistent with the pathway and the direction that I felt called in. And I suppose the rest of my life was about resolving that. I then genuinely fell in love with Lenore. We married quite young. I was 25, I think. And but you see, the issue hadn't been properly resolved. So there was an inner conflict and confusion within me, to the point where eventually I knew I had to get some kind of help. And I also knew that I had some decisions to make. And as a couple, we made those decisions. I got the help. And I guess that's why I'm passionate now about making sure that people have access to the right kind of help if that's what they want.
And what age, how old were you when you sought that help then?
Well, only, in a formal sense, only once we had emigrated to the UK. We came over here only in 1999, and it was around 2000 that I just felt, I had to do something about this inner turmoil and conflict. And that's when I sought both pastoral help and also formal counseling outside of the church.
Right. And so this, and then this is the kind of help that people are calling conversion therapy, isn't it? That's what the kind of help that you asked for or sought at that time. And it involved, what did it involve? Well, you had pastoral counseling and help and prayer, presumably, and then also secular therapy as well. Is that what you're saying? I just wanted to understand.
Both. To be honest, it wasn't great in the church without, being overly critical. There are all sorts of sensitivities. I was a married man with 2 children, and I remember talking to a pastor and sharing what my dilemma was. And he said to me, "Thank you so much for sharing. You are so brave. But please don't tell anybody else."
Right.
And that kind of, the messaging that came to me through that was difficult, because from my point of view, I thought I was genuinely coming into the light.
Yeah.
I was trying to be transparent and trying to be honest about my situation.
Yeah.
But he obviously saw the fact that here is a married man in a church context. There are all sorts of, insecurities, let's put it that way, that I'm sure he was dealing with. Now, but I think it's illustrative of, certainly at that time, the difficulty that many people were facing with this issue. And that's really when I began to seek help outside of the church. My faith was strong enough, but that was my basic dilemma. I had been born again. I had been soundly converted, but I was still dealing with feelings and attractions that felt very foreign. And that was the thing that I needed to get some answers for. And that's why I went in the direction of formal counseling and psychotherapy.
Right. And that helped you?
It definitely did. But if you were to probe further, I think what I would say is what helped me was the salience of the relationship between myself and the counselors that I interacted with. That was the key. So it wasn't about a method. It wasn't about an approach. In fact, some of the approaches were not great, to be honest, as I reflect back. But what was important was the fact that this individual was safe and was making themselves available, taking me seriously, and doing what they could to support me in my journey. It wasn't a case of me just putting myself in their hands. I had an agenda. I knew what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
but I didn't necessarily know how to do it. And
So in
these,
some ways, I don't let me put words in your mouth, but hearing it, I'm thinking in some ways the most helpful thing was being able to have conversations, serious, in-depth conversations with somebody who you could trust and who was on your side and who was wanting to support you in what you were trying to achieve.
well, that's it in a nutshell.
Right.
And if we can provide that, we have provided an awful lot.
Right.
Because that's what's been missing in people like myself in terms of connection with another male that is safe. There had been connection with other men, but they weren't safe.
Yeah.
There was some crossing of the line. There were things that were not appropriate. But in these professional contexts, it wasn't a friendship. It was professional, but it was a kind of intimacy that modeled appropriate, healthy relationships that I should have developed or could have developed with other men. That's what I experienced in counseling, and that's what helped me the most.
Yes, and helped you to think through as well what you could do and how you could think about it and so on. By some things, yeah. So okay, that's very helpful, Mike. So and then you got into doing this kind of ministry therapy yourself. Tell us about that.
Well, I started to look around at whatever was necessary to qualify myself. I had, worked hard in the university context. I saw the value of professional accountability. I saw the need for collegiality. That was all very much a part of my
because you got a PhD somewhere down the line, didn't you?
I did, and that was an important step. But now I wanted to turn my attention to some kind of professional training. So I wanted to find a modality or an approach that I was happy with. And to cut a very long story short, I was involved in a kind of retreat. And at the retreat, there were some people who were very interested in psychodrama. And psychodrama I found to be very useful because I could tell my story. It's a group modality. It's the original group modality. J.L. Moreno developed it. I'm not a fan of his theology, but I liked the fact that he recognized that we need to learn how to use the resources of a group. And I think for the population group that I come from, that was important because often the wounding is from the group, if you get my meaning. So me on the sports field, my inability to interact in an appropriate way could be addressed in a group context that was safe and was well put together. And that's what really attracted me. So I began training, was into my third year, traveling every year from every other week, I think, from Belfast to Birmingham until the consensus document on conversion therapy began to show itself, and there were some reservations in the professional bodies about the whole area of helping people with homosexuality, that really struck home to me, that there was a difference between the ethical values of these mental health bodies and what I was doing in my life and what I wanted to do.
And you ended up losing your qualification, didn't you? Is that tell us about that? That's part of the story.
Well, I approached my trainers and said, look, I'm hearing all these things from the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy. It was the time when Leslie Pilkington had been stung by a journalist who actually only ever saw her twice, I think.
Yeah, so for the viewers who don't know that story, Mike, she, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but she was a counsellor, and she was offering to help people with unwanted sexual desires, and an activist did a sting operation, pretended to want help, which he didn't actually want, and then recorded some of the conversation or something, and then took it to the media, and that resulted in Leslie Pilkington being struck off from her professional body as a result of that, even though it's completely unethical what he did. And this is like the first sort of startings, isn't it? How many years ago is that? 10, 12 years ago?
It's 2012, somewhere around there. I think it was the same time as the London bus case.
Right. Yeah. And this is when it started to be that you couldn't practice, you couldn't offer help, any professional help, could you? Openly offer professional help to people who want help with unwanted sexual desires. That's basically when it.
The fact is that in training, I was already doing it, because you're required to have so many hours, and I had been doing it. I'd been completely transparent with my trainers, etc. There was no issue.
Yeah,
I was doing things according to the book and according to the ethical practice, but the ideology changed. That's the thing.
So what people might not realize, you see, watching this, new to this subject, Mike, is there's already a professional ban on this kind of therapy, isn't there? And it's been around for like nearly 10 years now. And all the counselling bodies, all the professional counselling bodies, including the Christian ones, have signed up that we will ban people who do this effectively, isn't it? That this is not something that any professional can do.
Well, it's true, because Core Issues Trust, which by that time was fully organized, was a part of the Association of Christian Counselors.
Right.
But both Leslie Pilkington and myself were told to leave. They would no longer accept Core Issues Trust.
Yeah.
But the frustrating thing was the professional body that I was working within refused to even acknowledge, I think, 40 pages of argumentation that I sent to them. I never even got a, acknowledgement that they had read it. They had certainly received it. It was delivered to them in the right way. But there was no engagement with the issues that I was raising.
Yeah.
I would expect them to say, your argument is wrong. Your sources are out of date. You have missed this research or that research.
Yeah.
But it was simply a curtain that came down, and I was on the wrong side of the curtain.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like censorship, isn't it? It's kind of like there's no discussion about this. But just stepping back a bit. So what is conversion therapy? How do you define it? Or do you try to define it, Mike? What do you see this as, or how do you describe your ministry?
Well, conversion therapy, of course, is a term that was coined by Douglas Helderman, who is a gay activist within the American Psychological Association. And it's very traceable in terms of why he used it and what is being done. They used to refer to reparative therapy.
Right.
And you notice they don't do that in formal documentation. Neither do they refer to reintegrative therapy, which is the newer term. And it's worth pointing out that I think the reason is because these have been trademarked in the US. You cannot use those terms just loosely. And so you see, there's been a corresponding change in the way activists work. So they stick with conversion therapy. So to answer the question, what is conversion therapy? Well, that's a really good question, because actually it's so much and it's everything that seeks to have an alternative point of view to the normalization of homosexuality. It's neither about conversion, nor is it about therapy, really. It's about people who want to dissent when it comes to this idea that homosexuality is just another, normal and viable expression of sexuality in the human race. That's the issue. That's the idea that's got to be closed down. And I think the neo-Marxists have begun to use conversion therapy because it's a word with a mission. It cuts deeply into all sorts of things, especially into the church and into gospel work. This word conversion, it's challenged there. And then also the word therapy. Right throughout the LGBT movement, we have these words, homophobia. This used to mean something completely different in John Wesley's day. He would speak of, the fear of man. But now this has become something that is very specialized, just like the word orientation. All of these words are words with a mission. And they are designed to do something in society. And that's why language and the uncritical use of such words in the church, in my opinion, is something that we need to take care of. If we take the philosophy of orientation and superimpose that on our anthropology and understanding of mankind in a biblical context, we will come up with a very distorted view of humanity and of creation.
So what term do you prefer then? We don't like this term, conversion therapy. Fine, we've sort of got to live with it. But anyway, what do you describe, or what term do you use to describe what you do?
Well, I'm concerned to preserve therapeutic choice. I believe the rights and freedoms of individuals are sacrosanct, and what we need to protect is the trajectory that adult individuals want to go in.
So just unpack for the non-specialists. You're in this world, Mike. Therapeutic choice, right? Just unpack that for a non-specialist. What do you mean by that? It's a very important concept, I think.
Well, I think it relates in professional circles to the whole area of autonomy. Personal autonomy, is something that is highly esteemed in the professional world of psychology and psychotherapy. We want our clients to have goals, to have ambitions. We want them to be realistic, and we might challenge them from time to time, but we want them to be motivated as much as possible to journey through life. It's not about what, the psychotherapist gives. It's very much about supporting the journey that individuals are on. It shouldn't be about a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist's agenda for a client. It should be that those professionals are listening very closely to the aspirations of a client. And so that's what we mean. People should have choices. If they come to a psychotherapist and they are told, no, sorry, your concern about your homosexuality is invalid because that's who you are. Well, that's not a neutral position. That's a very, that's very heavily pregnant with meaning, if I can put it that way. That is assuming that homosexuality is innate, inborn, and immutable. It can't change. And that's the issue. I think that
But
professional.
you would sometimes challenge people, like if they want to, let's say someone presented to you and said, I think I want to change gender, what would you say to them?
Well, let me answer that by putting it in these terms. When people come to us, we have to understand why they've come. And if they've been sent, or they're under some kind of obligation to go in this direction, then that's not a sound basis for any kind of meaningful relationship. So if somebody comes and talks about gender, well, I'm going to be in a position to listen to their story. The first thing I'm going to do is spend as much time to hear how they are describing themselves, what their issues are, what their history is, what touches them, what they want to achieve, where they see themselves, in the next 5 years. That's how I'm going to approach things. I'm going to listen very carefully.
Okay. But there would come a point where you would say, I don't think this is a good idea.
If somebody said they would, certainly. The good thing is when people come to me, they kind of already know where I am.
Yeah.
So they kind of know that I'm not the best choice in terms of affirming their new gender direction that they want to go in.
Yeah.
But, hopefully we would talk it through and we would get to the point where we make a decision. But the point I'm trying to make is the therapy room or the counseling room should be, a safe, open place where people can share their hearts and where they can be affirmed and they can be credited with, a good amount of respect. When there's a parting of the ways, that's a point at which you work where the client understands, okay, this is not going to work. He's not the right person for me to be working with. If the relationship is no longer salient, it's not going to.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot to cover in this discussion, Mike. I'm wondering how we're going to squeeze it into the time now, because this has all been very interesting. But so unpack it for me, Mike. Do you believe in a gay cure? Can you just cure people when people come to you? I want to get rid of my homosexual desires. Is that what you promise?
No, never. I wish, but it doesn't happen like that. What I see is people becoming more relaxed about their circumstances and then learning how to be empowered to deal with it, to achieve the goals that they want. So it's a long-term thing that we're talking about. It would be very wrong to give false hope to anybody.
Isn't it just okay to say be celibate and you'll be fine? Isn't that good counsel?
I think you mean abstinent. So that would be another word that we would have great difficulty with. This modern use of celibacy, I'm afraid, is kind of an affirmation of a continuing same-sex attraction orientation. I think, because we do unapologetically see homosexual practice as sin, what you do with sin is to abstain from it. You don't, kind of create.
So you would disagree with Christians who say, I'm gay and I'm celibate. You should say your aspiration is that you shouldn't be identifying as gay, or you shouldn't want to identify yourself in that way. Am I correct? Is that what you're saying?
I would, if clients come to me, I listen very carefully to how they describe themselves, how they label themselves. And if they do describe themselves as gay, then we interrogate that. And, it's kind of like taking it off your shoulder and putting it next to you and understanding what it is when you put that.
What do you mean when you say that? Yeah.
And once we've done that work, I think people are in a better position to understand, what is behind all of that, and they can distinguish between their issues and the socio-political issues of the world in which we live.
Right. And what do you say to all these people who say this is core to my identity, this is the way I was born, this kind of thing? What would you say to that?
I would say I felt the same way. I felt
Right.
that things wouldn't shift. I didn't choose the feelings that I had, or I was not conscious of the choices that I have made.
Yeah.
But I certainly got to the point where I realized I had some choices to make. And of course, this is a red rag for a bull. And many will tune out if you come anywhere near suggesting that there is any kind of choice. But there are choices, and choices are made every time we do things that reinforces homosexual practice in our lives. So I would be very wary of any labeling that pulls me into a kind of situation where I am a victim, that I have no choice in anything, because there are always choices, and especially if people are Christian, there is every opportunity. Now, we are not promoting some kind of perfection, and unfortunately, when we act out homosexually, damage is caused. We know this from all sorts of activities that we do in life.
What kind of damage? What kind of damage are you talking about?
Well, I think there are pathways that are burned into our brains. So, temptations can become habits, and habits can become addictions, and addictions can become so entrenched in terms of the kind of chemical changes that take place in our brains and in our bloodstream, in terms of how dopamine is stimulated, how we look for something that is going to stimulate us. This leads to patterning within our lives. That's why I'm not keen on the word orientation. I prefer to speak of patterning. And I know the patterning in my life became increasingly homosexual. And it was because of all sorts of little choices and situations that I got myself into. And when I began to understand that, then I think I understood the biblical principle of putting to death the misdeeds, of the flesh, walking in the light as he is in the light. Now, that's not everybody's language, but that worked for me. I knew that I could work on my issues and begin to deal with the things that were undermining me and undermining my confidence and my sense of relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ.
So, what causes homosexuality then, in your view? Or presumably it's a multiplicity of causes, is it?
Yes, never one thing, and we may not know. I was fortunate in my life that I did begin to understand some of the dynamics within my family that clearly did impact on me. But not everybody does. There's often traumatic. So many of the clients that I would work with have experienced some kind of trauma, and there have been interventions that have been traumatic. And often when those are dealt with almost as a byproduct, they gain a new perspective on what happened to them and how they responded to that, and how they thought, they felt that this happened to me because this is who I am. But once they kind of caught out the untruth about that, I have seen that they are then free to go in a new direction. And it's almost a byproduct of dealing with the trauma.
Very good. Okay, so you're not really focused on trying to get to the cause, although sometimes if it's obvious, you would be, I suppose.
I think it's empowering to understand your life and to see the dynamics at play and to understand the family dynamics and how we relate to the opposite sex and to the same sex, and to understand what the wounding is, where the wounding is. I can remember, for example, saying to myself, in the context of my relationship with my father, well, if that's a man, that's not what I want to be.
Right.
And it caused some gender
that was a big sort of decision you made that then had big influence in your life. I get that.
And I need to hasten to add, my father was not a bad man at all. And in many ways, he was a great father. And had I had a brother, you know, with the same father, the outcome may have been completely different. It's a combination of things that is often at stake here. But the point is, these, you know, these promises that we make, these decisions we make as children can have real consequences in later life.
Yes. Yeah. Like a resolution that you made.
Yes.
So tell us, Mike, what is the evidence that this works, right? Do you have scientific studies? Do you have, you know, I don't know, what do you have to show this works? This is making a difference, is helping people? Because a lot of people don't believe it works at all, right?
Yes, Christians, many Christians don't, and many people who don't have a faith share the same point of view. But here's the thing. Just look at how the activists work. They rely on anecdotal evidence. So at the moment, the government is being pressured to listen to the stories of those who have been permanently damaged by all of this. And but we're not provided the same courtesy. So there have been many occasions when activists and those who have been hurt, according to their testimony, have been invited to 10 Downing Street. Every invitation we have ever put forward to senior ministers has been rejected. Now, the point I'm making is this. Even the American Psychological Association said there is no evidence one way or the other. Even Professor Michael King of the Royal College of Psychiatrists has said that this is a very difficult area to try and research. And the reason is, which ethical body in any university in this country is going to approve research that, you know, takes a random population group and ascribes to one a placebo and to the other effective treatment, and then compares the results from that research, from that empirical research? You will not get it past an ethical body. So
presumably that's true of any therapy. I mean, you can't do that with any therapy, can you? And how do you is that right?
The point is, ethics committees and human subjects in research are very heavily policed, if you like. So you can't just do things the way we could do things with other things, other kinds of research. And yes, you're correct. You know, we can just head back to paracetamol. Paracetamol is potentially lethal.
It is actually.
Used in the wrong way. And
well,
so
it wouldn't be approved these days, would it, with a double-blind trial, etc. But anyway, you know, because it has side effects that are higher than would be now acceptable.
But here's the point, Tim. Sorry, we go to the supermarket and we can only buy 2 packs of, I don't know, 30 or something. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so we regulate. You know, we enculturate a way of working with this product. We don't ban it. We don't take it, you know, out of the system. We teach people how to use it. And I think that's what we're failing to do in this context.
Yeah. Okay. So basically what you're saying is the evidence for therapy, that you can't have a sort of a phase 3 double-blind trial, etc., because that's just impossible with any therapy. So would you say the evidence for this kind of therapy is as good as it is for any therapy?
The first thing I need to say is we're not talking about a therapy.
Okay.
What we use the term safety, sexual attraction, fluidity, exploration in therapy. That's what we do. And people who work under that umbrella will have 101 different approaches to doing this. You don't have to have one exotic therapy. I didn't have the therapy. I had a psychodynamic person. I had somebody who was steeped in Freudianism. I worked in with somebody who was very clued up in attachment theory. You could be using all sorts of techniques and approaches, but it's how you do it, number one, and what your focus is, and number two, it depends on the quality of the relationship that you have with the person that you're working with. That's what is paramount here.
Okay, all right. And Mike, so you're talking here about various secular techniques. Why don't you just use biblical counseling? What's wrong with that? Isn't the Bible good enough for this kind of stuff?
Well, it is, and we do. But here's the point. Many people think that they are just getting the Bible. And I guess some people do just read the Bible and that's the end of it. They get all the answers and they never have, any further issues with this. But many don't. The thing is, people who work in a church context and are receiving help from a church, well, it's the same thing. Chances are the quality of the relationship between the person seeking help and the person administering that help is of a high quality in terms of the quality of the relationship. It's safe. It's not going to be that the person oversteps the mark, and has the same issue. That's the disaster. That's what we all have to be careful of, that people who do this work are well kind of managed and accountable. So does it work with biblical counseling? I'm sure it often does. But here's the thing, these techniques, if they are based on good science, if the approaches, the modalities that we use in psychotherapy, if they are based on scientific foundations that are sound, then I don't see any contradiction between that and, our knowledge that comes from our Judeo-Christian values.
A bit like taking a paracetamol again, I suppose, Mike.
Well, yes. The thing is, there are scientific principles that underscore the kind of work we are dealing with. For example, this population group often suffers from lack of confidence, low self-esteem. Yeah. So some of the training that we do is very much about increasing assertiveness, trying to help them to assert themselves in an appropriate way, because this is the population that doesn't ever want to put its head above the parapet. It just wants to go along with everyone because it's so afraid of, having its head chopped off. So if we teach people how to be assertive, that can help them very often. And I think there's good scientific basis for that kind of approach. It's all about a re-socializing, a re-engagement, and I think that those things are very sound.
Okay, so listen, I want to bring Andrea Williams on into this conversation. I know she's been listening in the background here, because the question now is, right, why is the government saying they want to ban, as in criminalize, what someone like Mike Davidson is doing? What has got into this government? How have we got to this position where there's already a professional ban on helping people like this, and now the government is saying, yes, we want to criminalize it? Well, how do we get to that, Andrea?
Because they don't understand. They don't understand Mike. They don't hear what he's just said. They don't hear all the stories that he brings forward. The government's doors are closed to that. They fear when they do understand. So we've had some statements coming out of governments saying that they don't want to criminalize talking between people. They say this kind of thing, but the force of the LGBTQI lobby comes in and says, unless you ban this, people like me will die. This whole miscommunication around the labels, the use of conversion therapy to shut down all as a term, the misuse of words to shut down all logical and kind and compassionate talk about this, is why the government has got to where it has. The culture has become so steeped in it that unless you celebrate and affirm people in this particular practice, belief, then you are punished. And so we've seen with Mike Davidson,
what all Mike's doing is affirming people in their desire to move away from
this is
sexual desires, right? That's all he's doing.
This is absolutely correct. And I've known Mike Davidson for well over a decade. I've seen the lives that have been transformed, and some of them are listening in to this live stream this evening. I've seen the incredible changes in people. I've seen a work that has grown. I've seen hundreds of people gather, understanding that this is a true need in our culture. Of course it is at this time when people are hugely confused about their identity, hugely confused sexually, where Mike has talked about trauma in childhood, but where our children are being taught in schools all kinds of sexuality, are being exposed to pornography very early on. I mean, this kind of stuff is happening in our culture, and the answer from the government and the answer from the institutions is let it flow, let it go, let it flow, and affirm it. And to speak in the way that Mike has spoken becomes hateful, becomes phobic, becomes something that's punishable, becomes something that is illegal, even criminal. And I want to say, Mike Davidson can have his bank accounts removed. Mike Davidson can have his Facebook removed. Mike Davidson can have death threats. Mike Davidson can have hundreds of calls through the night, hate calls. And who comes to his rescue? Who comes to his defense? Does the government say that should be banned? Should the criminal activity against Mike Davidson, the shutting down of this viewpoint, is not punished within our institutions? And so what should the church do and what should we do? Well, we need to keep on making in films like this. We need to keep on telling the stories. We need to keep Michael open for business. Mike needs to train the next generation. We need to keep on telling the stories. And because the culture is so steeped in sexual chaos, we need to speak of sexual truth. We need to put the sexuality in its proper context in life. And we know what that is within the biblical model, within the lifelong union of one man and one woman. But we need to be speaking this as a freeing and releasing thing that is true. It's in many ways, but I mean, but it's hard. But for being a Christian, it's hard to, you can see this kind of complete chaos through the eyes, through spiritual eyes, and not be surprised by it.
Mike, do you want to add something to this?
You know, Tim, I was thinking about your earlier question. You know, why do you even bother with psychotherapy? We've got the Bible, that's enough. Now, the Bible, I think, is very clear that we must do good to all men.
That's it.
Not only to the household of faith. And I think of the missionaries the China Inland Mission.
Mhm.
You know, they went and they used to say, you know, you made us better. And then we heard the preaching of Jesus, and you made us sick again, because they came under conviction. But they heard the gospel because they found liberation through the medical interventions that those men brought, and women, imperfect as they are. And I think we have a responsibility to care for any man or woman who comes to us seeking help. And you cannot just start by hitting them over the head with a Bible and telling them, go away and read this. And when you've done that, you know, you'll be fine. What you can do is listen to them carefully. You can stand with them. You can give the quality of being a good listener, and you can pray for them in private all you like, but you deal with what they bring.
Mike, even if we do just stick with the Bible, right? We've already had a prison chaplain who's been ousted from his job for quoting the Bible in chapel, right? That, you know, a verse, what is it, 2 Corinthians 6, whereabouts, this is how some of you were in relation to various sins, including homosexuality,
Exactly.
which implies change, right? And so this criminalizing conversion therapy would criminalize the Bible, would it not?
I believe it would, and I believe that that is what we're facing. And you can see it if you look at the legislation that has come into Victoria in Australia, and if you look carefully at what is happening in Canada, that's the goal. And the issue is that this is not sustainable. So I'm hoping that the UK government will learn from the extremes that are being proposed all over the world, and will recognize that what we should be doing is investing in good quality, careful support for people who come from different ideological points of view. And that's my argument, that what we are seeing is this kind of monolithic one point of view that governments in the past have lined up to support, because these are very powerful lobbies. And what that has done is to marginalize any dissenting point of view. And that's the absolute basis of a democratic society. The ability to critique and dissent and to raise issues is what is at stake here. This is Marxism in its purest form. It's about creating animosity and creating conflict, and so to progress the revolution in that way. And they have found that this is a very useful way of promoting their agenda, and that's what we're seeing, I'm afraid.
And I think what we should also say,
I think what I want to say is, so what I see from this is that we need to be encouraging men and women in our churches, that are counselors, to be fearless, to train, to come along Mike Davidson's work. We need to see a great defense of Mike Davidson's work. We need people need to be involved in the International Federation for Therapeutic Choice and Counselling. We need this. We need this body to grow. It's an international body. It's peer regulated. This is the sort of thing that we need to see these movements grow. And they are taking on a life of their own. And it's something, as Mike has spoken of some of the extremities across the world, when we see an international body that is well researched with professionals in it and success stories, people's lives changed and turned around, then we're going to have the evidence that's going to come forward in the days and years and decades to come. That's one thing. But let me also say this, that for the church, the cry should be, for the Christians out there, take what Mike has said seriously. Understand what one of the key issues that we have to break in this society in order to see a healing within our society is the grip of the sexual revolution of this, and where that's left a lot of adults, actually, because this has been going on for some decades now. but which is also being taught to our children as normal. When our children, it's no wonder that our children today, the levels that are identifying as bisexual, pansexual, have experimented both with boys and girls. This kind of confusion makes them confused, makes them demoralized, makes them unwell, makes them, and we see the kind of mental health issues in our children today. But when they're exposed to too much sexually too soon and confused, this is where we end up.
Well,
so
listen,
I'll just finish here, Tim, on this point. I want to say to the churches, you are the healing houses and the hope houses. As Mike alluded, when the China Inland Mission, you are actually the hospitals. What I mean by that is the healing house, the safe place, the place where you can talk about these things in a proper context, in a safe context, and get better. And it's as simple as that. And if the people of God can't work it out how to do that, then we're doing a disservice to our children. We're doing a disservice to one another, because this is one of the critical places for healing in our nation at this time, when we begin to see that this is really where people are addicted, where the neural pathways have been changed as a result of what they've been, the kind of stuff that Michael talked about earlier. When we understand this as a church, when we understand the root of the hurt, and the church will call it, and the Bible will call this sin, the stuff that messes you up. When we understand that we have the healing is in giving people the safe space to talk it through, and the hope that Christ can bring in the church context. Alongside that is absolutely right, because there's going to be a whole load of people out there that just want to say, I don't feel very good about this. I feel pretty sick with all of this. I've got to stop this behavior. Help me. Well, then, Mike's door and other doors, we need to have doors like Mike's open all over the place, so that people can make, can get better. Because they can get better. I think this is the other point. People can change. You don't have to be stuck in bad addictive behaviors that you don't want to be stuck in. No one needs to be stuck in that.
You know what I think would revolutionize things, Andrea, is for the fathers to be the fathers.
Amen. That's it.
And for us to learn how to father our sons and daughters who are hurting in this. If a church could develop 3 or 4 mentors who are safe, listening men, strong men, who will befriend people who are confused in this area, who long for connection with a healthy male or female, if they're female, that will turn things around very quickly. We don't have to shout and send people, to the nearest expert. We can do this. It depends on the quality of the relationship. And if it's been broken for an individual in the past, then we can be the fathering agent now that will begin to change things.
That's a message of hope. And it's doable, you see. This is the point. It really is doable when we get it right, when we see the Father heart of God, when we when we model that correctly, when we seek the purity that is found in Christ Jesus, when we believe that his power can heal and transform, really believe it as the church, and really know what it is to model fatherhood, and to be a good mother, to be a great older woman, to actually model what virtue and modesty and being a wife and a mother and just kind and wise, and celebrating the virtues, the beauty of womanhood,
and recognizing the value of intergenerational interaction. Older people with younger people with older people. We don't have to be in these silos. We really can learn from one another. And if there is an emotional connection that is healthy, that will do wonders for
That's
the
healing in itself, yeah. But another key to this, and I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to spend too much more time now, but a key to this is testimonies of people who are ex-gay and ex-trans and all of these things, isn't it? And Mike, it's quite striking, your story, that these, you know, testimonies of people who claim to have been harmed by therapy have gone into Parliament. What about testimonies of people who are ex-gay and all of that? You've got this organization, haven't you, X Out Loud, and I hope my colleagues can put the link to that up on the chat here, on the comments here, for people to see. There's many testimonies on there, and they're very powerful, and we need to hear those stories, don't we? And we've done some interviews as well on our live streams, which I'm sure we can also post from some of these people, and I see that some of these people have been watching today, Matthew Grech and so on. Fantastic testimonies these people have got, and people need to hear these stories and be inspired by them and realize that change is possible, and it's out there. Yeah. Well, listen, Mike, thank you so much. Your wisdom is really profound and wonderful, and the battles you're fighting and have fought are really fantastic, and we salute you and support you and love what you're doing. I really appreciate your expertise in this area and your ability to articulate it really well. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching. I hope you found that helpful. I certainly did, and we will share it on social media and other things as well, and look forward to seeing you again on our other live streams. And do follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and connect to our email as well, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
God bless. Thank you, everyone.